Don't forget that you're listening to Nightmare. The subway has always been one of the main arteries of this city, an underground network that connects thousands of destinations and millions of lives every day. But beneath that everyday hustle and bustle, there's something more. Something that vibrates between the tunnels, that hides in the shadows. Something that many ignore, or choose not to see. With so many years of operation and millions of passengers, tragedies were inevitable. Accidents, deaths, disappearances, and with them came the stories, rumors, voices that travel from car to car, feeding an urban mythology that, no matter how absurd it sounds, continues to grow. What if not all of it is just stories? I remember hearing about a creature that lives in the tunnels, a kind of giant rat, impossible to catch, that runs freely along the tracks, always staying out of the light. Some workers swear they've seen it. They say its screeches aren't like those of a normal animal. They're deeper, almost human, as if that thing knows it's being watched. They say that if you ever hear it, it's best not to look back. Another story that haunts me is the one about the man with the briefcase. Many swear they saw him walking between train cars decades ago. His clothes soaked in blood, the briefcase heavy, about to burst. They say that when it was opened, what was inside were hands, human hands, still wearing rings, nails painted, traces of perfume. No one could stop him. No one knows where he went. But every so often, someone brings up the man with the briefcase again. Once, someone told me about a girl, her ghost. She appears in an almost empty station at night, when echoes bounce off the bare walls. She asks you to play with her. Sometimes, she offers you her doll, but if you take it, you discover it's not a toy, it's her head. Other times, she asks for help tying her shoelaces. But when you bend down, you realize she has no legs. And yet, there she is, smiling. There are even more extreme accounts. One tells of a man who fell asleep during the last trip of a night train. When he woke up, there was no one else around, no lights, only darkness. He tried to find a way out, but came across two figures fighting. One of them, pale, tall, with impossible strength, was biting the other on the neck. When the witness tried to help, he clearly saw the blood flow and the body collapse. He ran to an emergency exit and told the guards everything, but no one believed him. After that, many people repeat the same advice. Don't fall asleep at the end of the line. You never know what you might wake up to. What disturbs me the most are the secrets surrounding certain lines. There are rumors of tunnels that don't appear on any map, routes that connect to secret facilities, places beyond the reach of any civilian. Some claim there are ghost stations. One of them appears only at 3 in the morning. A train, without a driver, stops for a moment and then continues its journey to nowhere. The boldest have tried to board it, but they say an invisible force pushes them back, as if something doesn't want them to get on. One night, while reading these stories on a forum, I came across a different account. One that, for some reason, gave me chills more than any of the others. Someone said that while in a university building, they saw a young woman coming down the stairs. She wore strange, outdated clothing, colorful jeans, a flashy blouse, and a belt made of improvised materials, as if she belonged to another era. The girl looked confused, like she was lost in time. She carried some papers in her hand and looked around as if searching for something or someone. The witness decided to follow her. He went up after her on the stairs, but when he turned the corner at the landing, she was gone. She vanished in seconds. There was no sound, no trace. Stories like these are shared every day. Some seem like jokes, others exaggerations. But there are tales that feel different. that stay with you even after you turn off the screen, because in the end, who decides what's real? I don't know if these things exist, but I know what I felt the first time I walked alone through a subway corridor at midnight. The silence feels different. Your footsteps sound louder, the shadows stretch longer, and even if there's no one around, you could swear someone or something is watching you. Maybe the subway doesn't just connect destinations. Maybe it also links this world to others. And you, have you seen anything strange down there? I want to tell you something that has happened in my family for generations. A story that has haunted me ever since I first heard it. Not just because of what happened, but because of how it ended. It's a story told by my grandfather, even before he met my grandmother. And to this day, no one in my family has been able to fully explain it. Everything happened during a time when the town's festivals lasted all night long. The music, the mezcal, the food, they were all part of a tradition that brought everyone together. That night, my grandfather was with his friends, enjoying the celebration. Everything was joy, laughter, jokes, until she appeared. Among the crowd, a young woman caught his attention. She wasn't from the village. Her beauty was impossible to ignore. Her features were nearly perfect. Her figure turned head. Many men looked at her, but it was my grandfather who couldn't resist following her. At first, they all went together as a group. They joked, whispered, trying to figure out which family the girl might belong to. No one recognized her. That intrigued them even more. She walked as if she didn't know she was being followed, crossing streets, gradually moving away from the center, heading toward the edge of town, where the houses gave way to trees. As they went on, the mood changed. The laughter faded. The group began to feel uneasy. One by one, my grandfather's friends gave up. They told him it wasn't worth it, that if she was new in town, they could ask about her the next day. But he didn't listen. He was hypnotized. He followed her alone, farther and farther, until the sound of the festival faded completely, replaced by the chirping of crickets and the gentle murmur of a nearby stream. That's where he saw her stop. The woman calmly walked toward the water, took off her shoes, and began stepping into the stream. The moonlight reflecting on the surface made her look even more unreal. My grandfather hid behind a rock, waiting for the perfect moment to approach her. In his mind, the scene was perfect. They'd run into each other by chance, talk, and who knows, maybe it would lead to a love story. But what happened was something very different. As he tried to move silently over the rocks, he stepped on a dry branch. The crack was soft, but enough. She stopped. Slowly, she turned her head in his direction. What he saw wasn't a human face. The figure bathing in the stream had the exposed skull of a horse. Not a mask, not a trick of the light, a real skull. White, dry, unmistakable bone. As if her humanity ended exactly at her neck. My grandfather didn't scream. He didn't freeze. He just ran. Ran like he had never run before. Back toward the town, not looking back. Not checking to see if that thing was following him. He just ran, driven by the purest kind of fear. When he got home, he banged on the door in desperation. His mother opened it, startled by the state he was in. She asked what had happened, and all he said was, "Turn on the light, quick, I just saw something terrible." But she didn't. She replied with a sentence that has been passed down as a warning in my family ever since. Never turn on the light after seeing something like that. If you do, you might go insane. My grandfather didn't talk about it again for many years. Sometimes when someone brought up the paranormal, he'd just lower his gaze or quietly leave the room. But one night, after a few drinks, he told us everything, just as I'm telling you now. No one ever knew what he truly saw. Some say it was a spirit. Others believe it was a witch or even a nawal. But to him, whatever it wasn't from this world. That thing had a presence that marked him forever. After that encounter, something in him changed. He used to say that the worst mistake is to follow what you desire without seeing where it's leading you. That not everything beautiful is good. That some things wear beauty like a disguise just to lure you out of what you know and into their world. Maybe that's why in my family we don't like walking alone through the countryside at night. Maybe that's why we were taught from a young age that if we ever see something we don't understand, we shouldn't try to explain it. And above all, we must never turn on the light after such an encounter. Stories like this have been part of our lives for generations. Some call them superstitions, others warnings, but I believe them. Because when the night's silence feels heavier than usual, when you feel something watching you from the dark, it's better not to find out what it is. This was told to me by my father, and although the rest of the family sees it as a silly story he brings up sometimes at gatherings, I believe him completely. He's not the kind to make things up, and we're not particularly into ghost stories at home. This is what happened. Several years ago, while he was working at a hotel on the beach in Salou, Tarragona, one night he decided to hang out with a few coworkers near the sea after a long day of work. They weren't drinking beer or anything like that, just chatting, when they saw a woman speaking Russian, whom they had already seen walking along the beach at sunset on previous days. This time, however, something was different. She was walking alongside a child, about 2 years old, who could barely move steadily through the sand. They watched her from a distance, remaining silent for a few seconds. The woman was extremely beautiful, and as far as they knew, she didn't speak a word of Spanish. They kept chatting as the woman and her child continued walking down the beach and eventually moved farther away, heading toward a rocky area. That's when one of my father's coworkers, who had a clear view of them, noticed how dangerous the terrain was for someone with such a small child. The others turned to look, but didn't seem too concerned. A few seconds later, a piercing scream made them snap their heads toward the rocks. The woman was screaming in desperation, looking out to sea. Suddenly, she jumped into the water without hesitation, and my father and his coworkers ran after her to help, although they couldn't understand a word she was saying. When they reached her, it was clear that she was desperately looking for her child, who had apparently vanished among the waves of a sea growing darker by the second. Everyone began searching, even venturing into the water. The noise and screams drew the attention of people passing by or nearby. In a short time, the place was full of onlookers, and even the authorities arrived. When my father came out of the water, exhausted, the police were already asking what had happened. He explained everything, but the strange part was that there was no longer any trace of the woman. They searched for her for hours, even the next morning, but there was no sign of the child or the woman. It was as if she had vanished into the crowd. One of my father's friends began to doubt whether everything had really happened the way they remembered it. Were they sure about what they had seen? Had what they witnessed that night really been real? Weeks passed, then months, and some of my father's coworkers mentioned that they occasionally saw the woman walking in the distance along the beach. Always at night. They said she would go to the exact same spot where everything had happened and climb the same rocks. However, none of them dared approach her or ask her name. The idea of going up to a woman in white wandering alone in the darkness of an empty beach wasn't exactly easy. Plus, the fact that she only spoke Russian made it even harder. My father, for his part, was never fully convinced it was the same woman. He thought their minds might have been playing tricks on them. But then something happened that erased all doubt forever. Almost 2 years had passed. My father met up again with a few friends at the same beach, at night, just like before. Of the group that had witnessed the original event, only he remained. Suddenly, one of the people with him looked toward the sea, as if something had caught his attention. My father turned too, instinctively, and then he saw her, clearly. It was the woman, walking along the beach. Just as real as the first time. But this time, unlike before, he felt a cold fear run down his spine. He knew that what he was seeing shouldn't be happening, because next to her walked the same child, exactly the same age as if time had not passed at all. The boy wandered off for a moment, and the mother shouted something in Russian. It was the same scene, repeated in every detail, as if time had frozen at that exact moment. in a carbon copy of what had happened years ago. My father, silent and unable to say a word, witnessed the woman and the child reaching the rocky area again. One of his co-workers, upon seeing them, almost exclaimed the same words as before, that the woman was crazy for trying to climb there with such a small child. The others stopped looking at them and continued their conversation, but my father couldn't take his eyes off them. The woman lifted the child in her arms, and my father felt like he was about to relive something he already knew. He closed his eyes in fear, and at that very moment, a chilling scream filled the whole beach. His co-workers rushed to the spot to help while he stayed frozen, watching from a distance. He never told them what he saw, nor did he share it with those friends or the ones who were with him that first time. After that event, some of the young guys from the hotel mentioned that they had seen the woman walking on the beach during the darkest nights, always heading in the same direction, toward the rocks. My father decided to leave soon after, and over the years, he thanked his lucky stars for never having seen her again. Well, friends, the next story I want to tell you has to do with something that happened to me not long ago. While I was staying in Barcelona, I was in a shared hostel with 4 other guys. It was a Saturday night, and almost everyone went out partying, except for me and one guy, Pablo from Almeria. He tends to stay at that place whenever he visits the city. While we were chatting in the early hours, when the whole hostel seemed empty, he confessed to me an unsettling experience he had during his last visit, in the off-season. Pablo told me that it was a Thursday when he arrived in Barcelona and stayed at the same hostel, the Pere Therese hostel. He apologized if he wasn't pronouncing it correctly, but he remembered it as a very popular place for young travelers on a budget. On that occasion, the hostel was quieter than usual. At the reception, they warned him there would be noise during the day due to remodeling work in some rooms. When he arrived at his room, he noticed that only one of the 4 beds was occupied, although no one was there at the time. He took a shower to rest from the long train journey and went for a walk. When he returned down the hallway, he heard a child's laugh behind him. It was strange, of course, but he thought there might be some children staying there, as he had seen before on past visits, so he decided not to think too much about it. It was after 11 p.m. when he returned to the hostel, and he found it very odd that he didn't encounter anyone, neither at the reception nor in the hallways. Everything was deserted. He took the elevator, which seemed to move slowly, as though it were carrying too much weight. The hallway lights, already dim, flickered and barely worked. Despite the chill running down his spine, he tried to stay calm. He walked quickly to his room, and as he opened the door, he noticed that a room nearby, just 2 doors down from his, was slightly ajar. He heard another child's laugh, and when he turned, he saw a little girl peeking out and watching him from the darkness. He quickly looked away, feeling uncomfortable, and entered his room. 2 other beds were made up, as if someone had used them not long ago. There was a half-empty coffee cup and an open book. Pablo wondered where the occupants of those beds were, but he tried to calm himself. He kept repeating to himself that there was nothing strange, that everything had an explanation. He climbed into the top bunk and noticed that the bed was warm, as if someone had just been lying there a few minutes ago. He tried to ignore it as well. He closed his eyes, but just as he was about to fall asleep, he felt his arm dangling toward the wall and falling between the gap of the bunk bed, leaning toward the bed below. Even though he was half asleep, a wave of terror ran through him. He felt like someone was below, watching him from the darkness. Then, he clearly felt fingers gripping his wrist. It wasn't a caress or a light touch. It was a firm force holding him, as if they were trying to pull him down, yank him out of his bed. He got angry, thinking it was a joke from one of his roommates. He quickly pulled his arm away and jumped off the bunk bed, ready to confront whoever it was, but when he looked around, he realized there was no one else. The beds were still made, the objects in place, but there were no signs of another presence. He walked down the hall, looked inside the shared bathroom, and even called the front desk, but got no response. That night, he barely managed to sleep. The next morning, when he went downstairs for breakfast, he asked if his roommates had left, but they told him that since the previous day, he had been the only guest assigned to that room. Pablo didn't insist. He left with a certainty in his body. That night, he had not been alone. And although he never saw the laughing girl again or felt those fingers, he says that every time he sleeps in that hostel, he places his backpack on the lower bunk. There was no one in the room. He quickly left, but something made him turn back toward the open door a few meters ahead. He clearly felt a gaze. And yes, inside, barely visible in the dim hallway light, a man was silently watching him from the darkness. He immediately went downstairs and asked about his roommates and the people in that room. At first, the receptionist avoided answering, claiming she couldn't give information about other guests. But when he mentioned the room number from which he had been watched, her attitude changed immediately. She spoke over the radio with one of the maintenance staff in Catalan, something Pablo couldn't understand, and then asked him to accompany her. They went up together in the elevator, and although he was still trembling inside, he couldn't refuse. Before entering his room, the receptionist asked if they could first check the room with the slightly open door. They approached and noticed that now it was locked. She opened it, and although everything seemed in order, Pablo felt the same dense warmth he had sensed earlier in his own bed, as if someone had just left the place. Just then, they heard voices. It was his roommates returning from the street. The receptionist went down without saying more, and he felt somewhat calmer seeing human movement in the room. He wanted to tell them, ask if any of them had felt anything strange, but no one spoke Spanish. So he let it go. He told me the story before he knew I had a horror channel. Of course, I asked for his permission to share it. Curiously, the receptionist was still working there when I stayed in the hostel. I didn't dare ask her anything, but hopefully, we'll be back. I never spoke to Pablo again. In fact, I never saw him again, nor did I find any record that he had stayed there recently. I asked at the front desk about him a few days later, and they told me they hadn't had anyone by that name registered in weeks. I thought maybe he used a different name, or that I was simply confusing things. But that very night, while looking through my travel photos, I found one that took me by surprise. It was an image of the room, from an angle I never took, and in the bottom corner, slightly out of focus, I could see a face. It was him, Pablo. But what troubled me the most wasn't that. It was noticing that behind him, right on the lower bunk, there was a figure sitting, completely still, with its head tilted, and eyes so black that they seemed to absorb the light. Dodo hadn't been there before, and since then, every time I try to delete it, it reappears. Always.